Friends, we are so excited and privileged to have these two gentlemen from this groundbreaking band from the 80s. We also have a special guest host with us today. Our friend Tim Risto from the podcast Creative Christians joins us today. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's an honor to be here, especially with these two legends.
And friends, if you would welcome with me Dave Workman and Rick Fields from the band Prodigal. Thank you guys for joining us.
What an honor. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes, thank you very much.
So we're kind of start at the beginning here, guys. When you were growing up, was music in your home, or was any of your siblings musicians or anything, or how was things growing up?
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I can remember specifically. So, I mean, we're really dinosaurs, me and Rick. So I think it was 1964. I remember I was 8 or 9 years old, I think, and seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show in glorious black and white. And I remember thinking then, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. And so I had an older brother who had a band that was a Beatle copy band back in the day. And so I can remember when I got to borrow his Hagstrom bass with the, I forget what it was called, the Kingston neck or something like that, Rick. It had some super long neck on those Hagstrom basses.
Yeah.
But that's how I jumped in.
How about you, Rick?
My family was somewhat musical. My dad played guitar, rhythm acoustic guitar, and also tinkered with the piano and the organ. And my mom played piano and organ, and a little bit of guitar. She had a tenor guitar, a 4-string guitar that usually is tuned like a ukulele, but she tuned it just like the top 4 strings of a regular guitar. And neither one of them were like real proficient, but we had a friend, they had husband and wife friends that would come over, and the guy played a banjo. So my dad would play guitar, this guy would play banjo. My mom and my sister would sing these old 40s and 50s country and western songs. Detour, There's a Muddy Road Ahead, and all these some of the cowboy songs. And I would just, on Saturday nights, I'd just sit down by the side of the couch and listen to this music and these harmonies. And plus I had an older brother who was a teenager who had a transistor radio. So that thing was always on. When he didn't have it sticking in his ear, he had it open, and so there was always music going on in the house and around the house. I was given piano lessons when I was 5. I took until I was 5 and a half, and my teacher fired me because I wouldn't play by the music. Once I kind of learned how the song went, I just played by ear, and he could tell I was playing by ear. So so there was always music around. And my brother went to the Navy when I was 9 and bequeathed me his radio. So that was glued to my ear constantly. So I was always listening to pop radio, top 40 type stuff. And then kind of the same thing happened when the Beatles hit. And I remember when hearing the kind of undercurrent of the Beatles and their songs weren't playing yet. And then finally a DJ said, okay, we've got this new Beatles single, and they played I Want to Hold Your Hand. I said, oh, that's it. That's what everybody's talking about. Mm-hmm. And I was 12 years old, and it was so different from everything. And I still like the things that I, the Beach Boys and the Four Seasons and the girl groups, but this was just so different. And I just ate it up, just swallowed it whole.
Yeah, don't you think that all music is context? Because
Yeah,
I mean, the British invasion saved us from Jan and Dean and
yeah,
the California onslaught.
yeah,
It was
exactly.
so different.
Yes, Dave, I agree. So then that kind of leads me to my next question musically is how did you guys get started on your respective instruments then? How did that happen?
Well, for me, it was, I'm trying to think. I think I was in the eighth grade. I was in junior high and got together with some friends. I mean, we didn't know anything. So it was on my brother's bass guitar. That's what I started on. And so in this little band, one day the drummer quit. And the guys, we're all just teenagers, said, "Well, who are we going to get for drums?" I said, "I'll play." And so sat down and quickly learned how to play a few simple beats. And yeah, that was off and running. I played similar to Rick. I was playing in bars before I could drive. It was just crazy. I remember there was this bar in, Rick, I don't know if you remember this bar in Kentucky called the Roundup.
Oh, sure. Played there.
The Roundup, yeah. So we were like off and on a house band there, and it was the weirdest bar. It had like a Western town in the back with a pool. It was so strange, and they kept a bear in a cage because the owner was this kind of mafioso type guy who would call everybody Bear. He'd say, "Hey, Bear," and one night he got the bear got drunk and bit off the guy's finger, one of his fingers, which we thought was hilarious back then because he was so mean. But I mean, I just remember playing in bars from the earliest days.
Yeah, I started off on bass also because bass was easy to hear on the records, especially if you had a 45 and you sped it up to 78. You could hear it would take the music up an octave and made it real fast, but the bass really came out when you did that, and so it was easy to hear the bass part. And plus, I didn't have to deal with those other strings. So yeah, I started off on bass, and I think between junior high and high school, I met up with some guys, and we had a little three-piece: drums, bass, and a guitar. And I was the only one that could halfway sing, so I was the lead singer. And then, after about 6 months, the guitar player's brother decided he wanted to be in the band. And well, that's fine, but what do you do? He said, "Well, I can play bass." And I said, "Well, we have a bass player." and I said, "Oh, but I play keyboard, so I play organ, so you can take my bass." He didn't have a bass. "You can take my bass and my amp." And I had them come over to my living room and set up, and we had a Magnavox organ, dual keyboard, just spin it organ. And I said, "Let's play a couple of songs and see what it feels like." And I had an organ teacher that taught me chords. So I knew all the chords from knowing the bass notes. And we played a few songs and said, "Yeah, okay, we'll do that." So I came through it actually from being a keyboard player. And then that's when we were playing in bars and everything. I had a Hammond and a Leslie, and carted that thing around to different bars. But I was, like Dave said, I was not old enough to drive. So whatever band I was in, somebody had to have a car that could put a trailer hitch on it, that could load up my Hammond and Leslie, or else I couldn't be in your band.
I don't know why we didn't leverage that more, Rick. Your no. I mean, your B3 playing, because you're a good B3 player. We should have done that more on the albums.
Well,
what's the story?
Loyd was a big presence. and he had those keyboard parts, and just actually there is a hidden B3 part that I have on Sleepwalker.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's like it's on the third verse, and it's like one note, it goes down, and just because we were at Pat Travers' recording studio doing overdubs, and there was a B3 there. I said, hey, why don't we throw this in on this part? So that's an assignment for you all to find that little descending note B3 thing that I did that wasn't mixed very loud and was not credited. But yeah, I mean, at one point, I had a little Moog multi-timbral synthesizer before we started recording, and we took it out to a few gigs, and I played on a few songs, and it just became, not really worth it for what it brought. So but as far as eventually transitioning to guitar, I told you about my mother's tenor guitar. While I was the keyboard player in this young band, I would sit home and learn to play chords on my mother's tenor guitar. So just 4 strings, and I would play all the songs that we were covering that I played organ on. I would play all the chords. Ooh, that looks good, Dave. I would play all the songs that we were covering on the guitar and learn to play them on guitar, just chords and things. And then we started following bands like the Yardbirds, started following guitarists like Clapton and Jeff Beck. And the guitar parts, the solos, became a little more complicated for the guitar player to pick out. So I was the guy that would take the record, slow down the turntable, pick out the part on his Stratocaster, and show him the parts. And then he had the dexterity and the guitar lessons, to actually play the parts, but he just couldn't really hear them and figure them out. So after a certain period of time of doing that, you start to learn repetitive things, and you start to learn how certain things fit together. But most of the time, I just for that I just concentrated on playing with when I finally started playing a 6-string acoustic. I just concentrated on like Dylan songs, and then as I got a little older, Neil Young and Stills and their acoustic stuff. But when I decided to be a lead player was when I met Loyd Boldman in February of '75. And we may talk about this a little bit later, how this all started. But at that point is when I decided I'm going to be a lead guitar player. I'm not going to be Jeff Beck. I'm not going to be Phil Keaggy. I'm just going to try to be what the song asks for. I'm not going to be flashy. I'm just going to be who I can be, because I didn't have the lessons and the time invested to do all those flashy things. So anyway, that's what brought me to the guitar.
Friends, you can see Rick or hear Rick in all of his glory. Just listen to the song "Burning Up" right there. But I was just going to say that, Dave, he was talking about Rick and the organ, and he said, why didn't we leverage that out? And I thought Dave was referring, because Rick was talking about if people didn't help him haul the organ around, then he wasn't with him. I thought Dave was talking about leveraging out, helping haul the drums around for Prodigal. Because because it's always the drummer that has the hardest part of toting the drums and setting up. You know?
Yeah, preach it. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Well,
Thank you.
actually, the guy that carried the biggest load as far as loading in and out was Mike, the bass player. Somebody wrote in the dust on the back of our truck, "God rules," and some kids were helping us load the truck one time, and they read that. They said, "God rules," and then they walked over and saw Mike loading all the stuff and said, "And the bass player loads." So that became our catchphrase: "God rules and the bass player loads." Of course, we were all our own roadies, and so loading in and loading out was all of our responsibilities.
We were one of those second tier bands that toured Montana and North Dakota in the winter, and Texas and Florida in the summer.
Yeah.
You went where you could.
Yeah.
So if I could ask, guys, how did your journey to Christ begin? Did your families go to church? Did you grow up in a Christian family? Just wanting to know some of that.
You want to go first, Rick, or you want me to?
Okay. Yeah. I'd say I grew up in a maternally Christian church. My mother was the kind of the spiritual force, and I do mean force in the household. My dad wasn't much for going to church, and neither were I was the last in the family, the youngest, and my mother was 40, and my dad was 44 when I was born. So all my brothers and my sister were all pretty much, except for my youngest brother, who was the teenager when I was 9. Anyway, they were all pretty much out of the house. So I didn't know anything about about their spirituality or whether they went to church. I figured they pretty much didn't go to church. So my mom would take me to church until I got old enough to say I don't want to go to church, and so especially when I'm out playing in bands, on Saturday nights till 2-3 in the morning, and coming home a little bit inebriated. I wasn't really into getting up and going to church on Sunday morning. So, but yeah, there was that influence from my mom and my extended family, her family. So I was around a lot of church people. And then in the summer of '67, in the early summer of '67, my dad retired from Procter & Gamble after 22 years and said, "I can't live in this city anymore." And it was a very tumultuous time culturally, and he was tired of it, and he wanted to get out and get away from everything. So he moved, just left the family. He said, "I'm going to Missouri. I'm going to buy a little plot of land, a small farm, and you guys can come with me if you want to." And of course, my mom said, "Well, Rick's got school." I said, "Yeah, I've got school to stay home from." So, that's my dad headed out to Missouri, and we stayed in Cincinnati. So the summer of '67, later on, for some reason, my cousins were, well, not for some reason, my cousins were going down to visit my grandma, my mom's mother. My grandma, my dad had bought this little property right down the street from his mother-in-law, from my grandma. So they were going down to visit Grandma Cagle, and I thought, well, they invited me to come. I said, "Yeah, I'll go down and see my dad. That'll be good." They said, "Well, we're leaving from there and going down to camp meeting in Louisiana." church camp. And I said, that's okay. I'll fly home from there when you leave. Like, how am I going to get a plane ticket? How am I going to, there's no airport. Like, the closest airport would have been St. Louis, which was a couple hundred miles away. But it didn't, I was 15. It didn't matter. You don't really think of things like that. But anyway, I got down there and was having so much fun with my cousins. When they left for camp meeting, I decided to go with them. So that was the big crisis intervention in my life in July of 1967, where God really got a hold of me and showed me the path that I was on, and showed me the possibilities of the path that He wanted me to be on. So I accepted that path, and things drastically changed immediately from July of 1967. Does that make any kind of sense at all?
Yeah, sure, Rick. How about you, Dave?
Well, I wasn't raised, my parents went to church off and on. They were not believers. It was just kind of the cultural thing. It's what you did back in that day. And they didn't make me go, so that was great. I couldn't see any reason to go. I didn't see how it affected their lives in any way. They struggled with alcohol and so forth. And so no one. I had an older brother and older sister. But what happened was I was playing. I mean, there was such an explosion of great musicians in the greater Cincinnati area. It was crazy. I was playing. So one summer I'm playing in this band called Adrian, and the guitarist was Steve Blue, or Adrian Blue, he later became known. And the bass player in that band quit and joined up with some band who was traveling through from Philadelphia. And they had settled in Kentucky in an old farmhouse because their management was in the Cincinnati area. And so I went and auditioned for them. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is going to be awesome. I had spent 1 year in college at that time. I had a scholarship, but it was no big deal. They were really basically giving scholarships away. And so that summer I'm playing with this band, rehearsing in this farmhouse. And there's a big blow up in that band, and the main guitarist kicked the other guitarist. That guitarist went on to become was Sid McGuinness, who played with Letterman's band for years on the David Letterman show. Great guitarist. The other guy ended up being a music producer in Nashville, did really, really well. So, but through that band broke up. I hooked up with the keyboardist from that band. We moved to Cincinnati, and we all lived together and then played, every week we're playing in bars and so forth. And during that time, I had moved, I was away from home. I had dropped out of college. My older brother, older sister were all gone. During that time, my mom and dad got swept up in the charismatic movement that came across the U.S. along with the Jesus movement, the Jesus Revolution. As a matter of fact, my wife and I went to see the Jesus Revolution movie when it came out recently. And we're sitting there and she elbows me and said, I had a dress just like that girl's. I mean, that was our world. And so I'm living with this band. My parents had become believers, and I'd go home to see them ever so often. And my mom was relentless. All she talked about was Jesus. And it was just seemed crazy to me. It was like aliens had sucked their brains out or something. And I remember one night just having a big fight with them and saying, don't you ever talk to me about Jesus again. And then slammed the door and drove home. And I don't know, a few weeks later, I cooled off and went back to see him because they had food and I was a musician. and my mom didn't say anything. She would put in cassettes of other guys talking about Jesus. She said, just listen to this. And so it really began to bother me, actually. And then the Christians just began popping up. That was part of that movement that was happening. It was a remarkable time, really. And so one night the band is sitting around, and this is in 1974. This movie had come out called The Exorcist, which was getting a lot of PR because people were fainting in the theaters and so forth. And I said, let's all go see the movie. So we got like terrifically high. We all went to the theater, and about 20 minutes in, we're holding hands like little girls. It was like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. And I think I had nightmares for like months about this. But it actually got me thinking about, what if there is something else? I mean, I would consider myself really an agnostic at best. In high school, I was reading Catch-22 and Johnny Got His Gun and all the anti-war stuff and Desmond Morris's The Naked Ape stuff. You know, it was just, I couldn't believe any rational person could really believe in a bearded man up in the sky, you know, that whole thing. And so this movie, what if there really is something else? And if there's something that could be dark or evil, surely there's a counterpoint to that. Surely there's something else. And just began to think a lot. And then my sister got involved in all sorts of crazy occultic stuff. And she began driving over. She lived in Kentucky. And one night she came to a bar where I was playing. And her girlfriend, she had gone through a divorce, had a little boy, and her girlfriend came up to me in between sets and said, hey, I think you need to talk to your sister. She's going through some crazy stuff. I said, okay. So I drove over to her apartment that night. We stayed up all night and talked, and she began telling me about just the craziest stuff that was happening. She was seeing figures at night in her room. She was hearing voices. She had gone to a party where a woman claimed to be a witch. And they were kind of making fun of her school teacher friends and her. And said, we'll do something. So she lit some candles and went through this thing. And she said the room got ice cold. And we were so dysfunctional. She had her little boy there at this party. She grabs him, puts him in the car, and they drive to their apartment. And she said, Dave, I'm telling you, I felt like there was something in the car from that point on. And that's when all this crazy stuff was happening. Well, I didn't have any grid for that. As a matter of fact, at one point I said, man, Bonnie, why don't you talk to Mom? Maybe this Christian thing would help you. And she did. She came to Christ. So it was just crazy. So someone invited me to a church, and it was a Pentecostal church in Cincinnati. And I'd sit in the back, and it was a great church where the pastor would say, let's all pray. And everyone would pray out loud in tongues at the same time. And I just sit back there and think, these people are crazy. They're crazy. But then I drive home and I think, man, it's like they really believe there's something there. There's something so real about, you know, the way they were behaving. And I remember, I think the fourth Sunday I was there, it was on an Easter, and the pastor got up and gave an invitation. If you want to receive Jesus, stand up. And that was it. I stood up. My heart was beating so, I thought people around me could hear my heart beating. I thought, if I don't stand up, I'm going to have a heart attack. And came to Christ there. And honestly, I remember driving home and thinking, what the heck did I just do? Did I just psych myself into something? But things began to change, and the things I once loved, I didn't love. And after a while, one of the guys in the band said, hey, I'm not going to live in a house with a Jesus freak. And I really wasn't saying anything. I mean, I was pretty low key. I didn't know anything. And so the band broke up, and began to make my way, got out of the whole bar scene. That was just not a healthy thing for me, especially with parents who drank a lot. I was, just drinking way too much, and it was crazy. Got a little apartment, met a guy who played guitar, and he and I just began playing guitars together in coffee houses and making up little songs about Jesus, and that was it. Eventually bumped into Rick and his band. He and Loyd had a band. It was actually called Crossroads at that time, right?
Yeah.
Rick?
Yeah, wonderful name.
Yeah. At that time, but we were all friends, and we'd throw concerts just to get all our buddies together who were playing in bands, all these young Jesus people, and do concerts in the parks and rent a generator. And it just seemed like the most natural thing in the world was to tell people about Jesus. I felt like that was the best kept secret in the universe. Why didn't someone tell me about this earlier? I feel that way to this day. So, yeah.
Well, you guys are kind of alluding to my next question. Could you give us some details on actually how the band formed?
Yeah, formed before me.
Yeah. We have to go back pre-Dave on this. And those were good times.
BD.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier that Loyd and I met in 1975. I had just moved to a new part of town, which was a little bit closer to where Loyd was stomping around. And so I found the closest music store to hang out in, and I had put some money down on a electric guitar, and was going up to make my final payment and pick up the guitar. And I walked in the door. I didn't notice a poster on the door, but as I walked out and the door closed, I noticed this cartoonish poster on the door that caught my eye, just the artwork that caught my eye. And so I looked at it, and it was somebody advertising, wanting a musician for this Christian band. Mentioned groups like Andre Crouch and the Disciples and Second Chapter of Acts, and they were looking for a drummer or I think a keyboard player, and said, so if you like this kind of music and you play drums or keyboards or if you do anything, call this number. So I thought, well, I like these people, and I fit under the qualification of I do anything. So I took down the number, and a couple days later, I called Loyd. He had been playing in a bar band, and the place burned down. And he had recently become a Christian, and he kind of took that as a sign that he might need to kind of regroup. And so he started with some friends from high school, and it was kind of a friends and wives coalition. And he put together this little ensemble that had Loyd was playing electric piano. They had a violin. They had a French horn, and then they had an electric guitar player.
The French horn sealed the deal, man. That
when I
makes
heard
for
that,
a great band.
yeah. and then three wives, Loyd's wife and his friend's wife and his brother-in-law's wife sang. And so I talked to Loyd. I called him to ask about the poster, and told him, well, not really that great a keyboard player, or I'm not a drummer at all. I said, but I play guitar, and and we talked for about 2.5 hours on the phone. First time we ever talked. And by the time, about halfway through the phone conversation, I was in the group. Somehow it's just he said, "Oh, well, you're in the group, so just come on." It's I was in this group called Crossroads that was all Fairfield High School friends and their wives, and so I went to a rehearsal with them, and so Loyd had started writing songs, and I get to this rehearsal, and he's got a book, Dave, you can imagine this. If the rest of you guys, if you knew Loyd, he has this book, and all of his songs, he's got the music staffs and then the lyrics written out and all the notes and everything on there, and everything is just like calligraphy. Everything, every page is a piece of art. And I'm looking at, and I don't read music, so I look at that and said, "Yeah, can you just write the chords down on top of somewhere on top of that, or actually, don't even worry about that. I'll just follow along because I play by ear, so I can hear what's going on."
That's the old lead guitarist joke, Rick. That's how you get the guitarist to turn down. You put some sheet music in front.
Yeah, yeah, it works. At least in my case. But so Loyd had these songs that were very balladish, long, meandering, every major seventh chord you can imagine.
Well, he was a theater guy too.
He was. That was his background, was theater. So, I mean, I could tell right then, even though we're rehearsing kind of quietly, that there were some pipes in there. Occasionally that baritone would come out and just, whoa.
It pin you to the wall.
Yeah. And it wasn't just baritone. When he went up high, he would, he could rearrange the furniture just with his voice. But
hey, by the way, let me interrupt you just for a minute. I remember when we were be on tour, the way we did our setup was keyboard was all the way on one side of the stage and drums were on the other. And this is before in-ear monitors. So we had these monitors that were just blasting the daylights out of us. And I could hear Loyd's voice acoustically above everything blowing across the stage. He was that powerful of a vocalist.
Yeah, we were playing at a church in Florida, and his microphone line had shorted out, and I could tell something was wrong because we weren't getting him in our monitors. So I would look back at the sound man when there was something wrong. I'd look back at the sound man, and I'd usually get like a shoulder shrug. And so then I knew it was time for me to do something. I was the troubleshooter, and so I stopped and I said, "Okay, can everybody hear Loyd?" And everybody on his side of the auditorium said, "Oh yeah, fine." And everybody on the other side of the auditorium couldn't hear him. So they were all hearing him acoustically above the noise of the band without a microphone. So that's how, but because nobody on the other side could hear him, we knew that. Yeah. So anyway, there's that. Yeah. But yeah, so back to this little Crossroads band, I thought, yeah, this is not really what I'm looking for, but it's something to do. Musically, I didn't have anything going at all. And I thought this is probably a safe place to dive into playing lead guitar, because it certainly doesn't look like it's going to require much. And these are all great people, nice people. I really liked Loyd. We hit it off. I mean, immediately, liked a lot of the same things. And so we, within like three weeks after I joined that group, everybody else quit, which was some kind of a sign.
Losing the French horn player was a big hit. That hurt. Hey, you know who plays French horn? Actually, it was John Entwistle from The Who.
Yes.
He was a French horn player.
Dave, you got me laughing. You know how when somebody tells a joke in church and you're not supposed to laugh because the preacher's preaching. So Rick's talking and Dave makes his comment about the French horn. He said that sealed the deal. And then Rick's talking and it's like I'm in church. I can't laugh as Rick's talking.
Go ahead.
We have to interrupt each other or we'll keep going.
Yeah, right. So yeah, what we do is we try to throw each other off track enough that the other one will stop talking and Yeah, and we try to kind of be each other's fact checker, but actually we gave up on that because neither one of us remembers anything really.
Does that set? There's a '70s Prodigal album. I think it was released circa '77 or something. Did that include the French horn? And did any of those songs morph over to future Prodigal albums?
Okay, no. The French horn was long gone. And at this point where everybody decided to quit, and it left me and Loyd. Loyd said, because this thing was not this crossroads entity, it wasn't a rock band, it could have been called contemporary Christian, you know, something like that. But it just, yeah. So when they all quit, Loyd asked me, he said, well, I was expecting to hear, well, are you going to leave too? No, to whom should I go? No, so he said, well, what do you want to do? You want to, I said, man, we've got a lot of background. Why don't we do a rock band? Let's get a drummer and a bass player and start moving that direction. He said, all right, let's do it. So I had some pieces of songs that I'd written but never finished, and he had some pieces of songs that he'd written. So we started like pooling those things together. We found at the church that we were attending at the time, we found a drummer that would pitch in with us, and we couldn't find a bass player, but so for a while we worked as this trio, and that's the group that recorded the album at Appalachia Sound in Chillicothe, Ohio. That made the test pressing, and that's as far as that got, of the 1977 disc that became known as Prodigal's Honey in the Rock album. And the way that happened was the test pressing. Honey in the Rock was going to be the record label. The studio owner was the producer of the album, and he wanted to do a record. He wanted to start a Christian record company, and he wanted us to be the first release. And his record company was going to be called Honey in the Rock. So when we got to the point of a test pressing, etched in the outside the groove between the label and the stop groove was the artist name and the record company name. So it was basically said Prodigal, Honey in the Rock. So somehow, and then when we got the test pressing back and started, listening to it, everybody decided, yeah, it'd take us 10 years to live this down. We're not putting this out. We weren't happy with it. We weren't happy with the sounds. We weren't happy with some of the performances. And so, it didn't happen. But, and I think the studio owner, I think he decided this whole concept of him starting a label was beyond what he wanted to do anyway. So somehow the test pressings snuck out. And if And I don't know how many of them were made. I mean, usually you don't make a whole lot of test pressings. I mean, just a few. You want the producer to have one. You want the label to have one. You want the artist to have one or two. So maybe 4 or 5. If everybody that says they have one of these actually has one, there had to have been 20, 30 test pressings made, which didn't happen. But a lot of people claim that they have this or have had it. And, maybe they don't remember that they don't have it anymore. But it's just that thing got around more than we did. Eventually, after Prodigal came out in 1982, somebody realized, hey, I've got this, and that's them, and that's before, and this is like, okay, well, this might be worth something. So people started trading them around and making bootleg CDs of it and things like that. And it's like whack-a-mole trying to, stamp it out. Loyd and I were just, of course, this was before Dave was around, and so
BD.
he could just BD, so he could just sit back and laugh at all this. But actually, you are credited on that record. I think you played tambourine on one song. And,
Wow.
And it says tambourine Dave Workman on one song.
So Rick, I have to ask, sorry, Kent, I have to ask, is there any chance we'll see that album come out yet? I know you've talked about it briefly on Prodigal Fans.
Yeah, I have talked about, I talk too much. Yeah, as you can see. And I put myself in positions that I realized not too long afterwards that I don't want to be in.
Yeah.
And it could happen. It might not happen.
Is your perspective the same? Oh, go ahead, Dave.
No, I mean, Rick, that was a politician answer right there.
Yeah. Well,
you pivoted, you bobbed, you weaved.
I want your votes.
Well, I got an idea, Rick.
What's that?
If you're really serious, and I think there's more fans out there than what you realize, I know that would take some money to do that, but you could even maybe do some sort of like a Kickstarter campaign and that.
What I've seen of Kickstarters is the incentives that you have to offer. I mean, that adds so much more work to it. And I'm old and tired. Well, no, here's what I'm saying is I look at all the things that and the incentives that people offer, and I'm thinking, okay, we couldn't do that. Okay, yeah, we couldn't do a house concert. Okay, yeah, we couldn't. And it's like wow, if they give all these it's like you're giving away all the product to the people that
Well,
so and there's the whole thing of taking in that money and being totally responsible for that and having that cash flow go through your bank account and all of the new rules with the IRS for payments, PayPal, all that stuff coming in where
you're wussing out.
Hey,
come on. Hey, I will personally, even though I wasn't in the band, I would personally come to a person's house and play tambourine. How about that?
well,
the tambourine.
and Rick,
The tambourine.
Rick, I
I'd
could
pay for that.
After this interview or sometime, if you want to talk about some incentives in that for Kickstarter, I can think of several just off the top of my head that wouldn't be huge burdens. I know what you're talking about. Some of them have a lot of tiers and all that, but you could do a good, even basic one, I think. And I think you might be surprised at,
well, yeah, and part of it, from my realistic frame of reference here, how many people would really be interested in that? You know, and it's almost like, yeah, start a Kickstarter campaign and find out. I would almost, I would almost want to know before I went to that,
Well, Rick, there are also other avenues that Silver Orb Media could team up with, and we can talk about that after this.
Oh, well,
So,
okay, I'd be open to some things.
Rick and Dave, just and Mike too. I mean, just to let you guys know, and friends out there, I can't state this enough. Prodigal is Christian rock royalty. And I mean that, Rick. I hope you take that to heart, and you too, Dave and Mike. And these albums are superb, and they were way ahead of their time production wise. We could all, as Christ followers and those who liked great rock music, we could all be proud of these albums. And Rick, I think, with all due respect, sir, I think you are underestimating
Yes.
how much you guys are revered and appreciated.
Yes, I agree.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that so much. I really do. But the record is really bad.
It's a part. Sometimes
you can see. I mean, there's some magic there, definitely. When I listen,
it's with the tambourine parts.
It's the tambourine part.
Yeah.
the tambourine lifts it up, man. It's like Ringo when he played the tambourine on "Love Me Do."
That's almost like
absolutely.
cowbell.
Thank you.
That's almost like cowbell, Dave. Yeah.
So more tambourine.
Okay.
More
Here's
tambourine.
the thing: Prodigal has already been established. This trilogy of albums is so revered. It's
you mean if I released this old terrible album, it wouldn't tear that all down?
No, it's all in context now.
Yes.
It's a part, it's a missing piece. It's a missing piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And we can keep it in context in retrospect.
Yes.
It's like forgive me because I'm not comparing Prodigal to Kiss. Two different styles of music, but prior to the band Kiss, they were in a band, Paul and Gene were in a band called Wicked Lester, and the music was totally foreign to Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
But people who appreciate Kiss can appreciate that Wicked Lester album, which had, ironically, the French horn and all of these other things with it. I'm serious. It's the same principle. I promise you, Rick, it's fans would be able to appreciate that. Plus the added bonus. You see, our buddy here, our co-host, Tim Risto today. Tim Risto, friends on YouTube, catch his channel. I'll put it in the links. But you see, Tim gave a very in-depth presentation of every vinyl, cassette, and CD of Prodigal.
Yes.
If we don't release this, Rick, if you don't release that album, then Tim's a liar.
Oh,
he doesn't have that on there.
Oh, I don't want that responsibility.
Yeah, right. No, I got to jump on this too, because I agree with Kent. I think, with a band that has the legacy that y'all have, the impact that y'all made, and people want to always know the story behind the story. And I was going to ask you that earlier, whether your perception of the album had changed since back then, but it sounds like it's probably pretty consistent.
But I'll go into that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I was just gonna. Yeah, I agree. I think you guys have more than established yourselves and the legacy of incredible music, incredible lyrics, incredible perspective on spiritual insight. For those of us that grew up, and as I think Kent mentioned earlier, and just how our faith lives were impacted by y'all as young teens. I don't think you have to worry about the legacy being tarnished. I think it's just wanting to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and see that perspective behind how you guys were back then, minus Dave, of course, but or at least briefly on the tambourine. But to be able to see that, hear that, and we have an understanding that's a pre-Prodigal kind of development. But that fascinates me to think about that.
Yeah.
Plus, Rick, you got the master. You could overdub French horn.
Yeah.
Take it to a whole nother level.
That's right.
Well, and actually that is part of the problem is there is no tape master.
Right.
It's a it's a cleaned up. The best I have is a cleaned up 40-year-old plus vinyl
Yeah.
that I'd be working with.
But
But people, I've had it, really pretty well cleaned up. And it's, it could probably be released as is now.
I mean, yeah, you could
if everybody knows,
you could convert that to digital,
sure.
Rick, and like you could even do more like remastering or whatever.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah, I would definitely do some more work on it. There's part of it is selfish. There's a couple of guitar sounds on that are just so terrible.
But you have to take it in context, Rick.
I was 2 years into my journey as a lead guitar player.
Exactly. See?
I was barely playing decent enough parts to get by, and then I didn't have anybody working with me on tones and sounds, and there's some decent sounds on it, but when it gets into, and there wasn't much called on these songs for big solos or anything. I mean, the big solos of Electric Eye and Just Like Real Life, those were like far in the future from what this is. But let me say this: I think if someone sits down and listens to this, I think that you can probably, I mean, you hear Loyd's voice and you've got that connection because Loyd's voice is definitely, and there's some songs that are definitely magic. There's some definite, you say, okay, that's maybe a CCM, a Maranatha song. It would have been a good song for the Maranatha era. And a few things, maybe production wise, just a couple of things that you could possibly say, if these guys would have started at this point and been able to continue without stopping and fumbling through 5 or 6 more years before recording seriously, I could have heard that, yeah. So, all right. Well, let's talk about some of this, and then let me get back to what was the question? Oh, yeah. The development of the group. How's the time? So if everybody's cool, then I'll just keep talking.
Keep talking, Reed.
All right then. So not too long after we finished recording that album, I think probably before we finished the mix down, our drummer quit. He had a domestic blow up and his marriage just exploded. And he said, guys, I got to quit the band. So here it was back to, and we didn't have a bass player. The bass player on the record was actually the A-list guitar player for the studio, and he was playing bass for us. So he played lead bass. But anyway, yeah. So here we are. It's Loyd and I again, and we've got things scheduled. We had a concert. I remember one concert. You guys are familiar with Sela, Rod Robinson. Sela was on, I think, Milk and Honey label. Mm-hmm. Anyway, their drummer sat in with us in a moment's notice for a concert in Barberville, Kentucky. The songs. He just kind of. We just did it and let it happen. But so then we started, and at that point, sometimes when we didn't have a bass player with our original drummer, when we were still Crossroads, at some point we changed our name to Prodigal. Mm-hmm. Because Crossroads was everywhere we went, there was a Crossroads church, there was a Crossroads coffee house, there was a Crossroads, and people were calling. One time we got introduced as the Crosswise Trio, crossways, crossroads, cross-eyed. And we said, okay, that's enough of that. So Loyd and I went round and round. What are we going to call it? And one day Loyd called me. He said, I got the name for the band. So, okay, what is it? He said, Prodigal. And we had a song. I had a song that was just a long, meandering, folkish kind of song, just me on the acoustic guitar, called Prodigal. And so I said, Prodigal. I said, well, one thing's for sure, nobody else is going to use that name, which turned out to be not true. Now you go on Spotify and there's like 7 different bands, some of them not Christian, but some of them Christian, that go under the name Prodigal.
But only one authentic one.
There's one authentic Prodigal. Yeah. So anyway, during the time when we were trying to find bass players, we had a couple of bass players come and they'd stay for a while, and they just couldn't handle the way Loyd and I got along. They couldn't handle our sense of humor or whatever, and they just eventually just say, "You guys are crazy. I'm out of here." And Dave would fill in on bass for us sometimes during that.
If only Dave had a sense of humor.
Yeah, so we didn't have to worry about that because it just all went over his head. And
you were desperate.
Well, yeah,
desperate and baseless.
Yeah, just I saw that movie. That was a Tom Hanks thing, wasn't it? So and we had as before we did the studio in Appalachia Sound in Chillicothe, and made that record, we had done a demo of a whole bunch of our songs in the basement of the house where Dave and his acoustic guitar playing buddy lived. So this basement actually also launched a demo for a guy named Rich Mullins, who was also part of this wonderful scene of artists and coffee houses and ministries, Jesus Ministries in Cincinnati at that time in the mid 70s and the early 80s.
That was crazy. I mean, we had started an underground newspaper similar to our friends up in Chicago, the Res Band and Cornerstone. Yep. I thought, man, we need that in Cincinnati, and had a little paper called the Light Free Paper back in the day.
Yeah, it was, and that was born out of for some reason we had booked ourselves or gotten booked up north somewhere, and we didn't know that Phil Keaggy was going to be in town at our home coffee house that night. And the reason we didn't know that is the scheduling was just like everywhere, and everybody was everywhere. So this paper was started to be a calendar, so that all these ministries and coffee houses and so I look back at some of the calendars now, and you'll see that Sela is performing here, Rich Mullins is performing here, Prodigal here, different groups, and then Andre Crouch is coming to town, and Phil Keaggy will be at the convention center. It's just so interesting to look back at that. Anyway, we finally picked up a drummer that latched on with us for a while, and a bass player named Greg McNeely, who had played with a Myrrh group called Suncast. Suncast was the group of a guy named John Phelps, who eventually became our producer. Anyway, Greg moved. He was from the Dayton area, so when he joined us as a bass player, he moved in with the drummer in Northern Kentucky, that wasn't a good idea. Greg wasn't married, but the drummer was, and it just led to some. Eventually, Greg said, "Okay, I better do something else." So Greg left the group. Greg eventually became an engineer. He engineered and produced the 2 Vision albums on Heartline Records, and did a bunch of engineering for us for our records. Anyway, there were times also when we had a bass player and didn't have a drummer. When we would get Dave to fill in on drums with us, because at the time Dave had this acoustic duo and no outlet to play drums. So we'd have him playing drums, or we'd have him playing bass. So we were,
we were desperate.
Yeah, we were. But that's where in this little basement studio where we were doing this demo, we tried to get our basic recording stuff done early enough that we could get Dave to set up his drums so we could jam for a couple of hours before it got too late. And that's the thing was, Dave, how fast can you set up your drums? If you can set up your drums in such and such a time, we'll jam.
That's where the leverage comes in, Dave.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, speed is of the essence.
Yeah.
The bass player loads, but the drummer sets up fast.
Yeah. And so we'd always have to leave time that we could jam, and then after we were done jamming, go to Skyline Chili, and still make it home in time to get to bed and go to work the next day.
One important question here. Skyline Chili still there?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's big, yeah. Yeah, and I just read that they've got plans to go national. I know they've got some stores in Florida and a few here and there, but I think they're getting ready to go big time national. I don't know how that's going to work out, but anyway, yeah, Skyline is still a big part of what we do here in Cincinnati.
Very nice.
Yeah.
We should move on to actually recording the 3 albums that these guys have on their desks.
Yeah, can I interject a question that may help bridge us to that? Maybe.
When did we do those? Oh.
Go ahead, Tim.
So I was going to ask, Prodigal had 3 vocalists, which is unusual. I mean, I know Loyd, obviously huge dominant force in many ways, but
3 unusual vocalists.
yeah, exactly. It reminds me a little bit of, I don't want to draw too strong of an analogy, but Pink Floyd for a while, you had Dave Gilmour sound, you had Roger Waters sound, very distinctly different, but they played off each other well in a lot of songs. You guys took that same approach. I'm just kind of curious, since I'm always interested in the creative process behind music and lyrical writing and things like that, how you guys came to that collaboration of 3 vocalists, and how your songwriting process, how you shared that among the 4 of you, because you guys seem to have a real cohesive collaboration, I guess, for lack of a better word, both musically and lyrically. You each chose songs that really fit your vocal styles very well. So I'm just curious how that worked between you all as band members.
Yeah. Well, when Dave finally quit being wishy-washy and actually joined the band, then he brought a lot of, we knew, and one reason we wanted him, not just as a drummer, but we wanted him as a songwriting talent and as a vocalist. By that time, I had pretty much stopped writing because I just couldn't keep up with Loyd, and so. But Dave,
Loyd was super prolific.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. I mean, we
amazing.
We rejected so many songs just because if they didn't click immediately at a rehearsal when he brought a new song, I mean, he wouldn't even, most of the time he wouldn't even say, oh okay, you know, sometimes he'd really push for a certain song because he could feel something or hear something in it that maybe we didn't hear when he first brought it, and he'd stick with it. But most of the time, if it didn't, and we would learn a song within 2 or 3 runs at rehearsal. I mean, this was, when I think back at musically, this was an amazing unit. The 4 of us.
Were you all perfectionists?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was typical of most bands. Someone would come in with a kernel of an idea, or maybe the song somewhat fleshed out, but then you just throw it into the Prodigal blender. And, you know, I mean, Mike would come up with, you know, funny, you know, we talked about this before, Rick. Mike wasn't really he's not really a jam bass player, but when he has the structure of a song, the parts that he would write were really, really cool. I mean, really unique in so many ways for a bass player. And the same way, I mean, if I'd brought in a song, Rick's going to put his stamp on it, and then whatever solos or guitar things that he'd come up with was like, wow, that just made the song. So it was pretty collaborative, I think. Wouldn't you say so, Rick?
Yeah. It would be sometime it would be interesting to have, you know, if there was time, but to tell the stories of some of the songs, how they came in and then how they turned around when, like, you know, when Loyd would bring in a song. I mean, just for a quick, for instance, Scene of the Crime came in. His template for it was Billy Joel's "You May Be Wrong or You May Be Right." Da, 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 da. You may be wrong, but I may be right. And he had me playing that line on the guitar, and he was just playing the chords under it. And it was kind of, fingering wise, it was kind of a stilted line to play, I thought, and I wasn't having any fun playing it. And the song didn't really have any drive. I said, how about you play the line on the keyboard and just let me put some chunking chords. And it took it from kind of a normal pop song into more of a harder driving rock song.
Yeah, it definitely became a guitar driven song.
Yeah. And it didn't start that way. And it took us twice through to, you know, I started the intro, and they said, well, okay, we'll come. And Dave put the punctuations to it. And it was just like, and usually we didn't have to labor over songs, even with some of the intricate time signature changes, or some of the band figures, the lines that we played together. I don't remember really having to labor over anything. Hardly.
Did y'all typically do lyrics first and then music, or did it vary from song to song?
That would be Dave and Loyd, and I think they both. Well, Dave, how about you?
Well, I was slower on the lyric side, and I think Loyd would come in with a more finished lyric for his songs most of the time, because I remember we were recording some of that, like Just What I Need as an example on this second album. I mean, we were writing lyrics all through the recording of that, trying to, man, are we going to have something for this or not? Some of it too was the format or the context in which we recorded, because, for instance, on Electric Eye, that was the mobile unit that came up from Florida from Full Sail, and we rented, or we didn't even rent it. They gave us that big old gymnasium building at a church that I was attending at the time to record in. And because we just seemed to have a little more free time to experiment, what I thought was really helpful, like, you know, even coming up with the little intro to Emerald City or whatever, and then, you know, buying the rights, finding, you know, oh gosh, we got to pay a lot of money to use that little tiny clip, or even when we were doing Neon and we were just playing around with ideas, and somebody said, hey, why don't you play with these rubber hoses? And so we did that whole thing with rubber hoses, just beating the crap out of the drums as hard as we could. And it was a fun experimental setting for a lot of the songs.
I love that sound on Neon. That drum ending is fabulous. I just love it.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's when, gated reverbs and gated, that whole Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel thing had come into vogue. And man, once we locked into that, it's like, oh, okay, then it's got to be big. Well, here, use these rubber hoses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and Electric Eye is where I kind of came into the band at. And still today, that came out in '84. So that's 40 years ago. The production, how did you guys do that? I mean, especially, not to knock Christian bands, but for a Christian band in '84, the production is still top notch. I've always been amazed at the production of that. How did you guys do that?
Well, a lot of it is what Dave mentioned, the Full Sail mobile recording unit. And having the freedom. See, we weren't on the clock, really.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to watch a budget. We didn't really know if we even had a budget.
We didn't know what we had.
Yeah, because our producer owned the studio.
Okay.
And so I don't know if they were keeping hours and time and all that. We just and John Phelps was very open to our ideas, and I think a lot of it had to do also with our influences. Ambrosia, not their
Not the pop Ambrosia,
not their top 40 hits, but their deep songs, their deep tracks, because they were very into polyrhythms and things like that, and of course Peter Gabriel and
everybody was using Steely Dan as kind of the that not the sound, but the way they recorded, how clean it was. Yeah. That's what everybody used back in the day to test their PA systems before concerts.
Yeah. So just having that time and that freedom from the authorities, I guess you would call them, the people that, we didn't have bean counters standing over us saying, oh, no, you can't do that. We're out of time. You have to. And for the most part, if we came up with an idea, John, for the most part, John would say, well, let's try it, or oh, that sounds great. We got to do that. And so that, I think that it pretty much came from the freedom to mess around, and for the freedom to mess up.
Yeah, and locations. I mean, I remember we recorded boxes up in a big room above the gymnasium during a thunderstorm. Oh. And there are times where I think you can hear some of that, but it was like, oh, this is just the right mood, the right setting for what we're doing right now.
That's another one of my favorite songs, y'all. I love boxes. I love acoustic guitar. I love your vocals, Dave. It's just phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind of you.
Who came up with the album cover for Electric Eye? That was always catching to me. That's the first thing I noticed when I saw that in the record store, was that whole lightning thing, and that is so cool. Whose idea was that? How did that happen?
I think that was Loyd's idea.
Lloyd,
yeah. I've got, and I think it's in with part of the things included in the box set. His original drawing of the concept for the album, and then of course we all put it together from that.
We shot it. Well, didn't we shoot it in an apartment building or somebody's apartment? Somebody set up the shelves ourselves and put in our own equipment. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Whose idea was it to sneak in the cover of the eponymous album there on the, below the stereo speaker? Yeah. There's the eponymous album opened up.
Yeah, I think Loyd stocked the shelves.
That was pretty cool. while we're on this album, then, for those who may not know, we've got to talk about, what is it with Prodigal and the stop grooves? I mean, because earlier, Rick, you mentioned on that 77 Prodigal album, the Honey and the Rock, as it became known because of what was in the stop groove. And so a lot of people know, but some may not. You guys take us to the Commodore 64 code and the stop groove on the vinyl. Whose idea was it? And explain it to our viewers who might not be aware of this. It's like the coolest, what do you call it, guys? The coolest
concept.
Easter egg.
Easter egg, yeah.
Easter egg, yes.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, if anybody is interested, let me see. I wish I would have been prepared for this. Robin Harvin's 8-bit show and tell. I think it's his YouTube page. Has a really good explanation and foray into the Commodore 64 thing. But what I would say, as far as, to me, that smells like Loyd. Wouldn't you say, Dave?
Yeah, I don't remember
the concept.
It probably was, or it might have been could that have been a John Phelps thing too? Would he have popped up with an idea like that?
I wouldn't think so.
Somehow someone technically came up that, this is possible.
Yeah, I think Loyd came up with the idea, and then we had to actually research it, and we didn't know. Talked to David Brown, who was the assistant or vice president of Heartland Records. We didn't know until we actually got a test pressing, and you had to. So it was computer code for a Commodore 64 computer, which was the hot personal computer at the time. And we had, we found a guy that would write this code. Loyd came up with a couple of quotes to put in there. This guy came up with this little program that would run off this code. We recorded the code on to the master tape that was sent to the pressing house, and then they sent a test pressing to us. So what you would do is, if you discovered that when you let the turntable go all the way past boxes, right, second side, right, that there was another stop groove that would keep the needle from going all the way to the label. That's what the stop groove does. But there was a stop groove before that with some more grooves, real thin. And so if you pick the needle up, put it past onto that second set of grooves, you just hear it sound like modem chatter, but it was computer language, computer chatter. And then on the flip side, in the space between the label and the last groove, there was a C64, which was a clue that computer chatter was code for a Commodore 64. And if you played that into and recorded it into a cassette, took that to a Commodore computer that had a cassette interface, played it, it would pop up with this little program.
Albert Einstein quote.
It was an Albert Einstein quote and then a Jesus quote, and it would just draw up a background screen and then print these two paragraphs. And that's all it was. So
that's really high tech.
Yeah, but we didn't know until we got the test pressing, recorded it to a cassette, and then we had to take it somewhere, to a little computer shop or to a Kmart or something that had a Commodore 64 that we could plug it into to see if it actually worked. We weren't, up until that point, we weren't even sure if it was going to work. And I think if it didn't work, we were just stuck with it. We just wouldn't promote it in any way. we wouldn't tell anybody about it. And but it did work, and we only saw it once, and it was that time that we looked at the test pressing copy and saw it come up and said, "Oh, that's cool. It works. Okay, good." And then it went on, and that was it. And Heartland Records had a little
contest.
A contest, and some student in Louisiana, at a college in Louisiana, found it, and they had to somehow prove that. And so I think they just typed out the quotes and sent them to David Brown.
Figured it out.
Yeah, and I think the guy won a lifetime subscription to all Heartland's releases, which he probably won 3 or 4 more records. And that was
it folded a couple of years after that.
So, guys, I want to ask you about the whole concept of Electric Eye, which I've said before. I think is just masterpiece album by you guys. All your albums are great. But Electric Eye in particular, how did that concept come about? Was that a Loyd thing? Was that a collaborative thing? And kind of a second part of this question, which really filters through all your albums, is how did you decide to arrive at the way you shared faith? Because I think that's one of the unique, most down-to-earth ways and why a lot of your albums resonated for so much of us, especially in our youth, but even more so now today.
Well, as far as sharing faith and our records and our lyrics, the songs, we just kind of got tired of the pat answers. That if A and B happen, then try, and then your answer is C. Okay, so, or if, there's always something, we'll do this, take it to Jesus. And it's just like, or we call them Sunday school songs. And we all know the famous bands that, their songs were basically Sunday school songs to rock and roll beats.
Right.
And that just didn't. We wanted to do music that grabbed us. Music that made us think. These were things that we were thinking about, and we thought, well, if we're thinking about it, then and the people that we talked to, and the people that we ran into, this is what they're thinking about, or if they're not, they should be. And I think a lot of it was, what? There's a lot going on, and maybe we should be thinking about this. But so many people have said to us through the years is you presented yourself as not someone from the outside telling people, or someone from the inside telling people on the outside what they need to do to get inside, but somebody that's in there with everybody else. We're all in this together, and we need to figure out how to make it work, or how it does work, and what needs to happen. We were doing a live radio thing in Clearwater, and somebody called in and said, when I listen to this certain song, I'm thinking, how is somebody listening to this song going to get saved? And my response to them was, we don't put these records together with the thought that as soon as one of our songs comes on the radio, they're going to let go of the steering wheel and get in their car. They're going to let go of the steering wheel and get down on their knees and accept Jesus. These are pieces. These are nuggets. These are, seeds. And these are to make people think. This is what we're thinking about. This is the way, we see things. People should be paying attention to things we think people should be paying attention to, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. And, we believed pretty seriously that it's the Holy Spirit's work to actually draw a person to the Father.
I think and I think we had very, very clear target in mind of the people that we wanted to speak to. And it was clearly people who were outside of the faith and were clued into the culture, were just engaged in the culture. And you just can't approach that in a didactic way. You tell stories. And so almost all the songs were a story. And sometimes it's almost like a midrash element to it. It raises questions as well. And so to us, that just seemed like that was the right approach to take. In our concerts, we would close with, one of us would close with a 5-minute thing about, hey, here's what happened to us. Here's a 5-minute distillation of how we came to faith, and leave it at that. But yeah, they're just we certainly didn't want to preach to the choir, and the whole time that we were with Heartland, prior to Heartland, John was trying to sell us to a secular company, to a secular record label. And that was always the hope, that we could get over into that world to reach a whole different audience. So it wasn't just albums that you'd have to try to find in a Christian bookstore, that you could find these albums anywhere. And
But to y'all's credit, I think you did, because I've said this before in some of my videos too, but some of the people I know that have, especially Electric Eye, in their collection are not necessarily Christians, are not people that you would necessarily expect to have that album. They found your album. And so I know there's a big fan base out there that discovered your album. And yeah, we were probably quiet for a long time, a lot of us, but you've had an impact beyond maybe what you guys still realize even today.
Hey, there you go, Rick. We were the Exorcist of the Christian music world. We were that movie in audio form.
Oh boy.
On vinyl.
Yeah, I always thought that was our theme song, Tubular Bells.
Electric Eye can, that it's not really a true concept album, but the songs really are, they're so connected in so many ways. But that was really, the song that Loyd wrote, Electric Eye, just really that just nailed it. It was, okay, yeah, that's what we're going after then. And
right.
Did you know when you were making the album that it was something really special? Did you have a sense of that?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
Maybe Dave did. I didn't.
That one was, you and Loyd had already recorded on the first album. You had used session players before the band had really, formulated.
Yeah, 3 of the songs were with session players, because that was the original demo that John Phelps did when he was pushing us to secular labels, MCA and a few, just about every label. Hard Bargain and I Don't Know Who You Are and Want You Back Again were all session players. And we didn't re-record those to put them on the first album with
So the first album, to me, the first album doesn't have the cohesiveness that that Electric Eye said and beyond, with Just Like Real Life. But it was, and I think for me, Rick, maybe you'd think the same thing too. Like on the first album, when we recorded Sidewinder would be a big song when we were playing live. It was just a massive, complicated, big song. And when we recorded it, it didn't capture that.
No,
and
not
it was
at all.
like, man, when we started work on Electric Eye, it was like we got to capture the bigness that we feel when we're playing live. And it's just recording is such a tricky, difficult thing. And you're under a microscope, and you're trying to get things perfect, and you lose. It's just so easy to lose the spontaneity and the power of a live concert, that it's really tricky. But we felt like we were getting closer to it with Electric Eye for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing for sure. And you mentioned Sidewinder. Sidewinder was not even a final take. We had put that away and said, if we need it, we'll come back to it. We weren't even sure if it was going to be on the record, because the record was getting pretty long for vinyl at that time, and Sidewinder's a long song. And then at the last minute, a decision that was made, kind of without a whole lot of input from us, they decided to go ahead and get the vocal on it and do a couple of finishing touches. But there are places in it where, like all of a sudden, the reverb sound changes, and the guitar sound on the intro, the guitar chords, they're playing with flanging a duplicate tape reel to get that phasing effect, and they were playing with it by changing the speed to see where they wanted it, and that never got changed. So you can hear that sound changing because it wasn't going to be a final take or a final mix or anything like that, but then it ended up getting used. So on all three records, there are things like that you kind of feel like you lost control on that, but for the most part, you're happy with. I'd like to get back to something that Tim asked about how we chose the vocalists. And the reason I want to go back to it is because I don't really know. I mean, usually Dave would sing his songs, Loyd would sing his songs, except there were songs that Loyd brought in that Dave sang. And then as far as I know, it never went the other way around. Loyd didn't sing any of your songs, Dave, right?
Yeah, he'd sang like in.
Well, he sang on
Just What I Need.
Just What I
Need.
Need.
The choruses.
He did the chorus, yeah.
And I think he same way in Busy Man.
Oh, right.
First album.
Yeah. See, like I said, I don't know, but usually, so since I wasn't writing these songs, they'd come in and throw me a bone every once in a while. So I was singing some of Dave's songs and I was singing some of Loyd's songs. Here's a tidbit that to me, it confuses me to this day. Loyd wanted me to sing "Burn It Up," and now it is, and I have an outtake reel, a full 45-minute reel of me and them, the engineer and producer, trying to get me to sing "Burn It Up" and now they hadn't heard Loyd sing it yet. And none of us had heard Loyd sing it yet because he showed it to me when he wrote it and said, "I want you to sing this song." And it just it wasn't in my range. It wasn't in my power. And finally, after all this time, Gary Platt was the engineer on that record, came in and said, "So how do you guys choose who sings what? Is it the songwriter sings it or what?" And I said, "Gary, I know what you're going at here." I said, "Loyd wrote this song and he told me he wanted me to sing it." And he said, "Well, let's have Loyd sing it." And Loyd went in and knocked it out in one take, of course.
Which, by the way, that third album has a different feel to it because the producer was different.
Yeah.
John Phelps had stepped aside and Gary Platt really produced the thing. And it just had a different feel, and it was in a shift going on in music where MIDI had come into play, and things were a little more, technologically, you could get kind of crazy with I mean, between Electric Eye and that album, we had got an Oberheim DMX drum machine, and I had bought Mylon Lefebvre's Simmons, his drummer, his Simmons kit. And so that's when Simmons drums had just come out, which were horrible. And your wrist hurt after you played them for about 7 minutes because it was just hard plexiglass. And before every concert, Rick had to rewire them to make them work because the leads would come off in the pads. But it was in that shift of music that some of that got pulled into that third album.
A lot of bands use Simmons during that time because that was an '84 model, if I'm not mistaken, here on Just Like Real Life. Or am I mistaken on that? No.
It was released in '85.
85.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was recorded in '85, but the drums would have been.
Yes.
I mean, Mylon would have been using them in '84. I think we bought them from Mylon in '84.
A lot of bands, Daniel Band used them. But guys, let me ask. So you mentioned a couple things. Rick, you mentioned the outtake reels, and you also talked about, like on Sidewinder, Dave, you were saying how certain songs made a huge impact live, but you couldn't quite, according, to your feel, it didn't have the same impact maybe on album. My question is, do you gentlemen have any recordings of your live concerts and these outtake reels, Rick? And I'm going to reopen this can of worms again, because you guys gave us this trilogy of albums, which are all top tier. And so that's your track record. I mean, you guys are revered. It's okay to go back then and to look at the growth and in a retrospective manner. And so, Rick, what about releasing these outtake reels? And what about, if you all have any decent recordings of your live concerts, what about releasing some of those? Because fans would clamor for that stuff.
Well, that's the key word, is decent. we don't have it. As a matter of fact, our last concert together, we were going to try to capture it on a bunch of Alesis when they had their first digital recording stuff, and it just did not work. It was bad, and the guy who we asked to do it just wasn't able to pull it off. So I don't know of any live recordings, Rick, that make any sense.
No, there's because in the early days when we started touring in '82 and '83, our sound man Paul Thompson would set up 2 room mics next to his console, and there would just be so much. We've got one of them that's the most decent one, was decent except that it was there was a bunch of high school kids. The concert was high school kids mostly, and there were kids pounding on the mic stands to keep time to the music, and then the mic stands would wobble, and there would be more, so the noise wasn't even in time. So no, we don't really have anything as far as live, and I have a lot of tapes. I have the 2-inch reel-to-reels that I've had some of them digitized, so I have access. We could, we could do alternate mixes. Well, on the let me see. I think on the retroactive releases, Matthew Hunt made me come up with some kind of alternate materials, and
there is, yeah.
So there's like an alternate take, an alternate mix. Well, it's actually an alternate take of Invisible Man, which is different. The guitar sound is different. You could tell in certain vocal places, that it's totally different. Some different things like that. There's one song. What album would that have been on? Maybe Electric Eye had the song called One More Time. That was live.
That's on Prodigal.
That's on the Prodigal. Okay.
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
CD.
Okay.
Live
Yeah,
at the fifth floor studio.
yeah. That's right. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that keep me awake at night, dreaming about doing. As far as the tapes that I've had, I would love to take and the 2-track that Invisible Man is on. I haven't had that digitized yet. I said, but I would love to tear that down and redo it because I think, although I don't know who would do it, we'd have to get totally different musicians. We'd have to get a different band to play it, but it would be awesome because it would be big.
So Rick, on these live recordings that you were talking about the kids, and in a way that's a compliment. They're into it. They're pounding. Yeah. Is every single song that way, or meaning would there be selections that you could draw from, and maybe a 5-song EP of 5 songs that kind of made it through that you could release it? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know. I mean, they're all on cassette because that's what he recorded to. But he recorded every concert when we were. I think this was like our Montana tour, our first Montana tour. So it would have been winter of '82, I believe. Yeah, and so all we were performing were songs from the first album. And some of the songs, maybe, possibly, I'll have to revisit that.
Fair enough.
I have so many questions, but I'm going to have to stop here pretty quick, guys, with your time, and I appreciate it. My one question is so you released Just Like Real Life in '85, and then there's no more Prodigal albums. So, like, what happened? Why did the band break up? If you want to talk about that at all, if not, I understand. I just was wondering what happened to the band after that album.
Yeah. Well, we were all abducted by aliens and reprogrammed.
I'll give you my version.
Okay, Dave.
I mean, I think things were falling apart for the record company, and there was just not the backing. They just didn't have the finances to push that album or do anything with it, and that was frustrating to us as a band. And, you just keep plugging away year after year after year and thinking, all right, eventually we're going to get to some place where maybe we can actually make a living doing this. And it just gets hard. We had voted early on that Loyd would have all the kids in the band. And so he had like 17 kids. But in that last year, I remember my wife and I, we were having our first baby. So we were married for 7 years before we had kids because we kept saying, let's just wait. And then when that happened for me, it was kind of like, well, I don't know if I could handle being an absentee dad. I don't think I'd be very good at this and so forth. And because the whole record company things just seemed like they were coming to a close. It seemed like a time for me, certainly, to move on and try to figure out, all right, what's next, God? I have no idea what's next, but yeah. So, and we just, I mean, the record company was the one who actually formed a booking company to manage and book us. And that was just not going on all 8 cylinders. So it's just hard after all those years to keep trying to function like that. And I I didn't want to be on the road and be a dad for myself. Loyd and Carol were able to make it work somehow, but I don't think I had the wherewithal to do it. So, I mean, that's my take on it from my world, Rick.
So you had kids?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, and at that time, Mike already had a daughter, and Loyd had 4 kids. So yeah, it was getting hard, and what was getting hard, the thing I mentioned before about not having any feedback, we just didn't feel like we were getting anywhere, and we were getting better and felt like we were getting more productive, and things were making more sense to us along that lines, but it didn't feel like we were making any headway. We weren't making any headway in the industry, on the radio, in our concerts. We weren't playing to bigger audiences. We weren't reaching more people. So
it's just hard to stay alive.
How long can you do this when you go out on the road for 3 or 4 weeks and you get back home and split up $100 among you, because all of the money went to, I mean, we were able to up our honorariums, and that, but the touring cost more. And so you pay for the truck, you pay for buying the product to sell, and pay for printing more T-shirts, and
it'd be frustrating because you go into a Christian bookstore in Phoenix and your music wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And either it was too, I mean, we got slammed in Charisma magazine, and we got, you guys you're selling out, and which was hilarious. there's better ways to sell out than to do, the Christian rock scene. And so it was just so frustrating. And Rick alluded to it. I remember we came home from a 5-week tour once, and my take-home pay, which was, we split everything evenly, my take-home pay for 5 weeks was $125. $125 for 5 weeks. And so you think, wow, how do we support our families? How do we do this?
It just got to the point where, unless, and there was always that, there was always the carrot dangling in front of us, but it's like, this is not sustainable at this pace. And when Dave made his decision, Loyd and Mike and I sat back and said, okay, and we didn't feel like we had enough industry clout to call Greg Morrow in Nashville or Memphis or wherever he was at the time, but a drummer, and say, can you be our tour drummer? Can you learn our songs and come and go? For one thing, we for $100 after 5 weeks, and we couldn't have somebody move to Cincinnati. We just didn't have anything to offer anybody. And we honestly didn't think that we had enough industry presence. We didn't think those guys, anybody knew who we were anyway.
Yeah.
So, we didn't think we knew that Dana and Eddie knew who we were just because they had us at their, and Milo knew who we were. But as far as like trying to pick up a musician to join, and there was nobody in Cincinnati that could fill Dave's shoes. We decided that we weren't going to be able to come up with a drummer who could also do Dave's vocals. So it just got to try to replace Dave and keep everything. And then what are we keeping to get to status? If we get back to status quo, what is that? And it just became it wasn't sustainable.
Was it frustrating when you saw bands like a Petra or a Striper, kind of break out, so to speak, and you guys were still kind of really working to just be known, I guess you would say?
Yeah. Well, they were already established when we came along. well, Stryper wasn't. They came, kind of a little bit after we did. But I mean, they had a whole different thing, and they
Yeah.
and a lot of those groups, a lot of those people um, had things behind them that we didn't have. We didn't have any support. Whatever we had to buy ourselves. We had to get ourselves. We didn't, so we didn't have buses. We didn't have equipment. We didn't have these. We had 4 par 64s on each side, so we had 8 can lights, and with a lighting controller that was controlled by Dave's hi-hat foot.
More hi-hat, Dave, more hi-hat.
More. I think the reality too was that the bands who were trying to do things that were more edgy or not so preachy, but trying to figure out a subtle way to present the message, most of them were struggling too. It was just hard.
Look at Kerry Livgren and AD.
We played a concert with those guys, and they were just as sweet as can be. Or the guys in Res Band were just great. They were great people, but everybody was struggling trying to make it as this contemporary Christian music thing began to go kind of crazy. Of course, it's leaning more into a more safe pop sound for the Christian bookstore. And that just was not working for us. And for so many of the bands, whether it was, DA or whoever, they were all trying to do something a little different and think a little differently. And that was hard.
You guys never really tried to break into CCM per se, right? That wasn't your goal, right? Right.
Yeah. We were, not wanting to mention names, but one very successful touring group said, we'd like you guys to tour with us, to open with us on this next big tour we have, but you got to give us a radio single. And we know you can write a radio single. You know what it takes to write a radio single. And we just couldn't,
Couldn't get there.
the old artistic integrity thing. We couldn't get past our artistic integrity enough to write a radio single, just to meet a certain, we just couldn't do that.
There were certain buzzwords that needed to be included in all those songs.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't get there. It just didn't feel like us.
Well, it just wouldn't have been, if it's not a song that you're going to write. I mean, we just did songs that we wrote. I mean, we didn't say, oh, we need to write a song that does this or a song that does this. It just wasn't us. It wouldn't have been genuine. It may have achieved its purpose. But then.
It was a pretty democratic band in that if one of us didn't like the song, we just wouldn't do it. And these were all songs that all 4 of us loved to play and knew it was right for this band.
Thank you guys for keeping the art in your artistic integrity.
Yes.
These 3 albums have blessed us for many, many years, and I can't thank you enough.
That's very kind. Thank you.
I have to agree. They're classics. They're just they've touched. I'm just going to reiterate for a moment, but what I've said in other videos too, just to gush on you guys for a second. But your band, your music, your ministry worked on so many levels for so many of us back then and through to today. You touched my life spiritually on a number of levels, musically on a number of levels. The integrity came across, your character came across. You guys just gave so many of us, again, especially me as a teen growing up, even in the church, you gave us something to latch onto that provided, obviously, a very biblical stream of the message in a way that I could relate to and that I understood, and a number of my friends understood. And I'm just so grateful for that. You helped me get through some tough years in high school, and I will always treasure that because I could feel the message coming through authentically. So even if you guys felt at the time maybe you didn't know who you were connecting with, just know today you were connecting with so many of us, and I'm very grateful for what you guys did. Made a difference for me, and I assume for Rex and Kent probably too. But thank you guys for being true ministers of the gospel and staying true to the message on so many levels.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We just want to respectfully remember Loyd Boldman, who passed away in 2014. Could you guys just share a quick story or memory of him or anything you'd like to share with us about Loyd?
There's so many great stories. Holy cow. The guy was just so freaking talented. He had so many gifts. It was just crazy. Big-hearted guy. He during some of those years that, he was pastoring a church. He was pastoring a Calvary chapel back in the day. And years before Loyd died, years later, we all got together, the four of us, and we were sitting around the table here at my house here and realized, wow, we all still love Jesus. He's still the reason why we do everything we do, whatever it is. And we're all still married to the same woman. It's like, hey, God's been pretty good to us. No complaints here.
Yeah. That was a very special opportunity. I believe it was 2 weeks before he passed. We got down there and got that picture.
Yeah. What a sweetheart.
Yeah.
Beautiful photo.
Yeah. Loyd, I said earlier when we originally met, we talked for a long time on the phone, but then when we got together and started comparing album collections, it's like we filled in each other's gaps in so many ways, not just album collections, but especially album collections. But then it's in spiritual issues and spiritual endeavors. I'd been a Christian a little bit longer and felt like I was able to participate in he and Carol in part of their maturation as Christians. My wife and I kind of mentored them a little bit in the early times, and just musically, we just really fit, and as friends, it was just very, very special. And then as Mike and Dave came along, it was just obviously the leading of the Lord to put this thing together, not just because of the musicianship, although that was an amazing 4-piece unit that a lot of times in concert sounded a lot bigger than 4 pieces. Just as friends and co-laborers, it was really. I remember when I first got the digitized masters that became the 30th anniversary box set. I brought Dave and Mike down to my studio, and we sat and listened through to them. And so it's the first time the three of us had listened to this music together in probably since we were in the studio listening to the mix downs. And it was just when we listened to all the way through, it's just like, man, you're far enough away from it that you feel like you can say things that would otherwise sound, arrogant or something. Yeah. But I mean, I just said, man, that was a really good band. And that was some really good music.
Still
All right, Rick, call Mike and let's go to Skyline.
Okay. Oh boy, you scared me. I thought you were going to say let's jam.
So where can friends and fans connect with you guys at? I think is there a website or a Facebook page where friends can connect with the band at?
Our website is at this point it is still up. It's prodigalnow.com, and you can leave comments there, and it will get to us through that. And then there's also a Facebook page called Prodigal Fans United. We are not particularly affiliated with the page, but we do check in on it, and I get notifications from it. It's run by a couple of friends of ours here in Cincinnati that were there in the day. They were young people that were inspired and moved by what we were doing, and so we're part of their story too. So, you can. I've promised them that if there's ever any major news of Prodigal, I would let them break it on the Facebook Prodigal Fans United.
Regarding that major news, then, whenever you release the Prodigal 77 album and the outtakes reels and the live recordings, go to prodigalnow.com and go to the Prodigal Fans United. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah. And I will also add, don't hold your breath.
Well, we're kind of winding down here, guys. And my last question is, what would you like to say to all your friends and fans, or what words of wisdom would you like to share with everyone?
Well, I'd say, the whole thing began with Jesus, and it'll end with Jesus. And so, that's everything to us. It was from the start of the band to what we're all doing now. I can't even imagine life without. I was meeting with a guy I just work with churches now and faith-based ministries, trying to help them get better and so forth. Just met with a guy the other day who's deconstructing and trying to figure out life after he's just kind of shed off everything, trying to figure it out. And the bottom line is, we're sitting in a pub having a nice cold porter, and I said, my assumption is that everybody in this brewery would be a better human if they just knew Jesus. And that's where Prodigal lived, and that's what we breathed, and that's kind of where we all are still at, all of us, Rick, Mike, and myself.
Yeah. And I agree with that, and I'd like to say too, wow, I mean, people that are still with us, that are still interested in what we've done and what we might do, or giving recommendations of what we should do. We just appreciate it. just after all these years to know that there are people that that got it when we were doing it, that latched onto it and that appreciated it then, and that have hung on to it for all these years. You know, when I got involved in reissuing and putting up the website, just finding out so many people, you know, that we just had no idea were there, and we're still there. And so I just want to say that we appreciate you guys, Tim and Rex and Kent, for putting this thing together, and for all of you that may hear this. We really appreciate the support and everything, and we'll see where it goes from here.
You got it. Well, we always close out all of our programs with something we call message from home, and we just want to keep the main thing, as Kent says. And I'm selecting the scripture for today, and it's always related to either the band, a song from the band's name, and of course the band's name is Prodigal. And Rick, you had said that Loyd came up with that name, and I really like that. And my scripture is going to be taken from Luke chapter 15, verse 32. And of course, this is the story of the prodigal son. And I think most people know the story. And the verse is relating to at the very end of the story, where the one son is kind of upset with his father, and having the fatted calf or whatever cooked and prepared. And verse 32 reads, and this is the father talking to the other son. He says, "But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And you guys have just been doing that through the band's career. And like you said, you were wanting to reach the lost, and your music really did that. And it was so original and unique and authentic. And we just want to thank you guys for doing that for us, and just ministering to us and people even today. So we just thank you for your time. And I know we went over our allotted time, and just thank you for being gracious to us. And thank you so much. And thank you, Tim, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate that.
Way to go.
If
Way to
you
go,
could
Tim.
say your YouTube channel again for people to check that out. Tim is doing a weekly devotional series too. That is very good, and he's super with his videos. What is that called, Tim?
Yeah, so it's under my name. It's Tim Risto, but it's also called the Creative Christians Channel. And I've got, Tim Talks Christian Rock is my show. It does a lot like you guys do here, talk about Christian rock, of course. And then Afterthoughts, which is just kind of a show about entertainment, media, culture with a Christian emphasis, looking at things from a Christian perspective. And then, my devotional challenge is also going on. So, and thanks for having me, guys. It was a great opportunity to meet Rick and Dave here. Certainly an opportunity of a lifetime for me. And I'm just grateful to have had the opportunity to be here, and with you, Kent, and with you, Rex, as well. So
thank you.
thanks,
Sure.
guys.
Well, guys, if you will just stay with us for 1 second, we're just going to sign off here and say goodbye to everyone. And thank you so much, guys, for being on our program. And Tim, too.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
And the things
Friends, we are so excited to have these two gentlemen with us from this groundbreaking band from the 80s.
Hey, Rex, start that over, buddy.
Okay. See, this is why we don't do this live, guys.
Yeah.
I just got tongue-tied there. Okay, here we go.
We'll give you plenty of reasons why not to do this live
Okay.
in the next hour.
Okay, Rick. Okay.